Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the VidQ podcast. My name is Johnny Nguyen, and I am here today. Or my guest for today is Maria Tran. She is a actor, filmmaker, and cultural practitioner. Maria, thank you so much for coming on and having this conversation with me.
Thank you so much, Johnny. I'm really excited.
So, first, before we get into your stories of your work in entertainment, why don't we talk about what was life like growing up in Australia? Whereabouts in Australia are you from?
So, I was born in a place called Brisbane in Queensland, which is north part of Australia. And my parents then moved to Sydney in Cabramatta. So, that's sort of the area that is renowned for having lots of Vietnamese people that would
In
congregate
Sydney,
in this
right?
one particular suburb. And it's been notorious for over the 90s of such as the gangs and sort of being a Vietnamese enclave, but at the same time, it harbors a lot of interesting stories of migration and refugee experiences. And of course, like my parents being, one of those families that moved to that area.
What would you say to an American like myself? What are some of the interesting little differences of the from the Vietnamese Australian community?
I find that in Australia, we tend to be very self deprecating um, in terms of our personalities and how we convey what we do. We don't like to talk about ourselves. Australians have a way of mateship. We always love to identify with our group and our collective. And sometimes when we see that other people are sort of standing out or doing something a little bit different or looking international, there's sometimes a sense of fear. And I would probably say that when it comes to how Vietnamese people in Australia see Americans, is we do find that you're very confident. We're just so open and confident and articulate, which is something that's quite different to what we are sort of used to conducting ourselves.
Let's talk about the story of how you ended up choosing this career path, right? How'd you get into acting? Was it something you always were interested in back in school?
Yeah. For me, to be honest with you, growing up, I was a kid. I was like one of the only Asian kids in my school. Actually, I remembered not having any friends. I remembered being very like the nerd, and people would pick on me. And I think during that process of growing up, realizing you don't have any friends, and not only that, the only thing that you identify on screen is like Jackie Chan films, Donnie Yen films, all these action films, because you can see someone with the same hair color as you as not being just a villain, but being like the action star. So I think for me, I always wanted to be something that's not the nerd. So growing up, and then especially after a couple of bullying incidents where I got beaten up in school,
For
my
what
parents.
exactly? Was it just for being different, for the way you like?
Well, I saw
Why were you
another
being bullied?
girl. I saw another girl. With one particular incident, I saw another girl getting sort of like picked on in the sort of the bathroom, restroom sort of area, and then for some reason, I don't know what I did. Why I thought I should have done this, because I saw it in a Jackie Chan film, right? So basically, point out the finger, stop, like that to them, right? Thinking that, oh my god, I just stopped it. But next thing I know, I then am the victim. So I then got beaten up, realizing that what's on screen doesn't really correlate to what happens in reality. And this is going back during the primary school ages. My parents found out, and they decided to put me into martial arts school just to at least build up the confidence. But the funny thing is, once you do martial arts, you learn the skills, body control, your presence, reading the room. You're very less likely to find yourself in many of those incidences after. So that's sort of one reason why I got into the martial arts. In terms of the acting, I think for me, because growing up, I was such a introspective nerd that most of the time I lived inside my head. So I would always look at like the cool kids or the interesting people, and I'll look at them. I kind of wish that I was them. So I watch and I study people. I have this ability to study people and absorb sort of like their essence of why they do things. why they're motivated to do things, and then go home in the mirror, start parroting them, you know? And that was just a fun thing that I did on the side. But then, you know what, as I got older, I actually studied psychology. I didn't study acting. My parents wouldn't be able to afford me into any, acting or any creative endeavors. But for me, I did psychology, and then from there onwards, on the weekends, I would, do sort of like short films here and there just for fun. And I think deep down inside, always knew I had something a bit weird about myself. A lot of actors, we have something a bit like, we can be ourselves, but sometimes we have this sliding door effect where we can get into another character and be able to kind of live vicariously for the moment and then come back out. And it's such a fun thing that I used to do. I guess also because I didn't have any friends. So I had to do that to entertain myself. So how I really got into acting, it's a very long story because I didn't get into acting straight away. I wanted to try acting by not only doing the short films that I saw in the local community, but also I tried to do extra work, got myself an agency. Sad thing was I never got any extra role, like ever. Like
Really?
I was always thinking maybe I'm just not the right look, or maybe I'm not the typical Asian. There's always this thing where I realize, and nowadays when I do shows, I sometimes get it, the stereotype where I don't think you're the right, that's the right character we're looking at. And the next take I do is I just squint my eyes. I go, that's it, that's the character. And I'm like, I just squinted my eyes to make it smaller, and that's the character, right? So that's what mainstream sees me as, my facial features. But it was only till I did a community project called Maximum Choppage, which was run by the community, that I realized that there is much more power when people in the community who have no skills in acting or filmmaking come together and try to figure out how to make stuff. Number one, because the fact that you're not in that field, there is more of a desire and more of a sort of like a momentum to problem solve and reverse engineer how to make things happen. So a group of us will come together and we'll film things, we'll test things. Oh, that doesn't look right. I don't think this looks like good acting, or this is a bad shot. So we just kept on doing that over the weekend, time and time again. Eventually we finished the feature film, and then TV series, TV network picked up the work that I did. And then they offered sort of a show called Downtown Rumble, which was a small interstitial. That was the first time we got a chance to write, shoot, film it, and put it together for TV. And over the years, I went into narrative-based stuff, but then, you can't sustain a full-time career, right? So then I got back into working in outreach, and then also in documentaries, which is the first time that I've done documentaries. But then I realized I'm quite good at it because, again, my skills as an actor, I'm able to sort of sit there and sort of observe and feel the flow of a person getting into a scene, a moment, and then being able to see whether they're living in that scene or not, so that the camera can capture it. So then the camera, when they capture it, the audience can watch it, and they can also create that image, that picture, that feeling, the emotions of the person going through that. So I became quite good at doing that on several independent documentaries. Then a very big TV funded documentary called Once Upon a Time in Cabramatta, which was a global big deal about seeing Vietnamese people and what they were like in the region of Cabramatta and their migration experience. I came on board that project because they were finding a difficulty connecting with the Vietnamese community. And I looked back and I'm like, well, it's because you've got a bunch of white people talking about Vietnamese people. Where are the Vietnamese people? And then they said, oh, well, it's too hard to find and no one wants to come out and talk. I'm like, no one's coming out to talk because you've got white people trying to talk to Vietnamese people. You need to have someone who goes into the community and actually listens to them, not coming in and go, I want to take this story, I want to take that story, I want to put it on TV. Because that's sort of the way the community works. The community is such an organic flow that you need to come in, be humble, have no ego, and just listen. And as you listen, then you can come up with what's the best way on how to have these stories framed in a way that meets middle ground with TV. So I did documentaries. And again, in between that, I did lots of different short films where, again, inside of me, there is that little inner performer,
Hmm.
martial artist, uh, filmmaker, and yeah, actor. And I would do, and eventually I did a feature film that was on hepatitis B. That was quite popular in the Vietnamese community. Again, another project came to me. They're saying, "Oh, we want to work with the Vietnamese community. We want you to do educational stuff about hepatitis B. Can you do like ads?" Oh, who's going to look at ads? Like, it's so weird just watching ads about hepatitis B. You know how when you watch those health promotion stuff, you're like, ugh, you don't
Hmm.
feel like, hey, I want to get checked. So I said to them, you know what, Vietnamese people, we love dramas. We love phim tap. You don't know how many go, we need to frame this health promotion campaign in the guise of a movie of family drama, the whole lot. There was a lot of, for me, there was an uphill battle doing that project, right? But at the same time, I got what I want. And it was so interesting because once we finished the feature film, I showed it back to the client. They're like, oh my gosh, it's actually good. And I remember they're white people, right? And they commissioned it and they're watching and they go, oh, I feel really bad that like I actually feel for the character. And in my head I'm thinking, so you were making this project not wanting to care about our community. You didn't understand that we are just like you. We are not separated because of our ethnicity, but we do have stories that you can connect with. And they, once I finished the film, they go, what do I do next? And I said, well, if you've got more funding, we can put it into the theaters because I don't have the money, right? I'm good at pitching, right? So they ended up giving us more money and we did a bit of a little screening, brought the whole Vietnamese community. They were booking every single seat, right? And the funny thing is, next month later, this film called Thay Đổi Cuộc Sống, which is Change Our Lives, it got pirated. Along Cabramatta,
Really?
all the DVD stores, it got pirated. And I went back to the client. I said, well, you've never had a health promotion campaign getting pirated,
Pirated.
right?
Yeah.
So that's sort of the stuff that I work with in terms of, I don't get projects that go, hey, Maria, I want to do an action film. I always get a project that comes to me that's of a different kind. And then I have to figure out how that would work within the Vietnamese community or the Arabic community, the Chinese community, whatever community that I am assigned to, and to make sure that it actually brings in audiences, it creates a community harmony, and there is now bigger picture for that community to move forth. But that's sort of one of my sort of projects, earlier projects that I've done. But for me, I do still love the action genre. And people a lot
So,
of times ask me, why? And the reason why that I keep on doing it is because, number one, there's not enough women in that genre. A lot of stories when women are in action are usually as a prop. They use it usually for the beauty or for their dragon-like lady skills. And they never get a chance to dictate story, directing, or even the writing process. And I really wanted to have a handle on that because I know, similar to like Bruce Lee, if he wasn't able to work in these other different fields, he would not be able to come in and be able to create stories that he wants. But through that process, there's been a lot of like ups and downs, challenges and failures because sometimes people find me too um, arrogant. Oh, you think you can do everything? Like, why? Like, you need to specialize. And I'm like, if I specialize, I won't be able to push the stories I want, right?
right, that's
But if
right.
I do everything, you think of me as a threat. So in the mainstream, I'm sort of seen as kind of this very elusive creative. And even recently, I did a big show on Paramount Plus, Paramount series called Last King of the Cross, where I would be acting alongside Tim Roth, who's Academy Award winning,
Mhm.
and I'm in across 10 episodes. So my character is quite
Wow.
a big character for that big, one of the biggest, most expensive shows in Australia. And even to get to that process, it was difficult because people were like, oh, Marie, you haven't trained. You haven't come from, acting school or film school. And I'm like, yeah, but I teach there. How the heck did I, oh, wow. You're like an anomaly. How did you do it? I'm like, it's because I've done the groundwork. You've done the groundwork in your traditional sense. I've done the groundwork through my community sense, and that's still valuable. So when I got that show, a lot of people kind of looked at me and go, like, how? Like, you didn't come from these traditional
Traditional.
trajectory,
Mhm.
right? But you got there, and this is a role that was casted like hundreds of people casting for. And even for me to even get that role, there was people who were like on the inside told me that people felt that I was the wrong choice at that time.
Wow.
So there's a lot of pressure coming in, being a big character, and also needing to deliver, not for myself, but knowing that if I do this right, I'm doing it for the whole of our Vietnamese sort of like diaspora, especially when we're in a Western series, we're the only Asian we're representing, we're badass, but we need to also make them feel for our antagonist character. And that was my job, not only as an actor, but also as a storyteller. So these are some of the challenges that today that I went through. Mm.
So I do want to go back to so I can get a little bit of context. In Australia, in relation to the Vietnamese community, to the Asian, I guess the Asian category, what who I- what's the largest community of Asians in Australia, and where does Vietnamese kind of uh, rank in terms of that, in terms of population wise?
Mm. Oh, I don't quite know statistics. I know there's the Chinese community, there's the
They're probably
Indian
the
community.
largest, right?
Yeah, and there's a few. I think we probably rank like fourth or something, fourth or fifth.
Okay.
I'm not entirely sure. Um, yeah, and I think because the Vietnamese community was one of the first largest Asian wave into Australia, and it pretty much abolished this policy called the White Australia policy at that time, because there was either one or two options. Either we were allowed into the country or the government's like, nope, we're keeping this policy to keep you out. But because of the changes and decisions made, we're able to come in. So we were one of the largest. And I would say we were like the testing ground to seeing if multiculturalism works in Australia as well. And I think, which makes us quite a significant community, the fact that we were some of the first wave of Asian migration into the country. But in terms of our size number, I feel like there are other communities that are much more bigger. But because we've got that sort of like track record from the beginning, I feel like a lot of times we are like the sort of like experiment, not only experiment, but sort of like the case study of seeing, like, especially after like seeing a group of people from a worn torn country migrating and seeing how settlement works. That's where we were, that case study. Mm.
Got it. I would say the same here in America, and I think we've uh, probably the Vietnamese presence is a lot more noticeable because of the American involvement of the Vietnam War. So when that first wave came here, uh, being Vietnamese, it wasn't as uh, people recognized the group uh, a lot more, and maybe because I was born and raised here in the heart of the largest population outside of Vietnam, which is in Orange County.
Mm.
Uh, I definitely grew up feeling like I didn't never really had to explain that I'm Vietnamese. Uh, when I entered into the entertainment industry in my early 20s, that was when I started realizing how limited opportunities were for Vietnamese Americans or just Vietnamese in
Mm.
film and television. Uh, I, uh, I was given opportunity to always kind of uh, play Japanese or
Mm.
Korean or Chinese. In fact, I was because of a I wouldn't say a mistake, but it was just generalizing. Uh,
Mm.
in the film Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift, I was casted in that film
Mm.
to be one of the featured extras in there, and it was eye opening for me that casting directors still couldn't really tell the difference between
Mm.
like a Thai, a Vietnamese, or a Chinese, and so forth. So yeah, so I just wanted to share that. I want to kind of shift gears and talk a little bit about your work. When I introduced you earlier, I mentioned the title cultural practitioner. Can you expand on what that means?
Mm. So, in terms of cultural practitioner, I work in a sector called the community cultural and development sector. So, what that means is that everything that I do is like artist led, but working in communities and always having this bi-directional learning sphere to then create. So it's not just me coming in saying that I'm the expert and taking things from a community group, but it's always having this bi-directional dialogue and being able to come to terms with that to then create something that that is community led, that is artist led, and because in Australia there's lots of cultures that come and populate the country, there's a lot of times lots of different organizations, and not only that, in the film industry, outsiders telling stories of that ethnicity. It's always the case, right? It's always that outside. Oh yeah, I know someone who's Vietnamese, or my cousin's married to a Vietnamese person, so I wrote
Hmm.
this character in. Like I've been in writing rooms, and I would be like, right. Okay.
Hmm.
So there's no understanding of what is internal going on with that particular character. There, you wrote it, or these groups of people are writing it because there is fantasy on this particular outsider look. So the work that I do allows people from the community to then grow as an artist, but not only that, understand that there is this system in place and this is the lens they see things, but also how to be able to break that. Because what I've learned is that if we protest against it, we're always going to be on the outside, not being able to make the change. But if we're able to offer value to mainstream, but also be able to start to create a place of groundedness where artists can feel comfortable saying that's racist, no, that's not right, and feel comfortable in expressing the authenticity of not only who they are as an artist, but the fact that as an artist, as a cultural practitioner, you represent not only the one, you are representing the groups of people that you've come across with and work with. So as much as, yes, I identify as a Australian Vietnamese and my Vietnamese identity, but I do find that there is a plight of being the other that is in some ways can be seen in other cultures as well. And it also, the learnings from our culture can also be something that other cultures take in and go, oh, so if they're doing like a Muslim story, these are the things that they might face, especially if mainstream don't have a writer or groups of writers or a director or producer that comes from the inside lens, not just from the outside lens. So your experience of sort of being casted, um, whatever Asian ethnicity, just shows that there is not enough skill sets from the mainstream to understand that. But at the moment, they don't care because they're just trying to
Hmm.
get stuff on screen, right?
Hmm.
So therefore, we need people more like us to be able to pitch to them and to be able to talk to them, say, actually, it's very important that you get the language right. No, I'm not speaking in Thai, I'm actually speaking gibberish, stuff like that. Because I've seen it time and time again where there are other Asian or Vietnamese actors, writers, producers, but sometimes they play that card. They're in the system, but they're
Hmm.
like, yes, 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 do whatever you want to our community, just as long as I get paid. It happens, right?
Hmm.
I would call them the enablers to
Hmm.
allow that to happen. But to be honest, when I think about it, they only do that because there's a fear, because they're afraid that if they speak out, they're going to lose a job. So
Yeah,
therefore, I want to create a movement where, as an artist, we shouldn't we overcome that fear, and the only way to overcome that fear is if you get really, really, really phenomenally good at your craft or
absolutely.
multiple crafts. That's the only way that people can't cut you down. Yeah.
So I want to talk about the creative community as it pertains to Vietnamese Australians. Um, from what I can see, and you can kind of expand on it here in America. Um, there's a lot more individuals working in all different sectors in the entertainment: illustrators, visual artists, writers, actors, and producers, and so forth. And there seems to be also we even have a film festival uh, out here in America as well. In in Australia, w- how far along has the community grown in relations to in relation to just film and television? Is there is there more than a few handful of actors like yourself from Australia that is getting more mainstream visibility, and same on the other end of storytellers and producers, or is it still it, it it's it's still at the ground stage?
Mm. I would probably say it is much more behind. We do have some outstanding Vietnamese Australians in the arts field, but there is still a lack of crossover and collaboration. And without that, there is no sustainability. So,
Mhm.
even for me, after I did the show on Paramount Plus, as my role as Madame Tien, even after that, I knew that that's just a show. Like after the show, I'll be back to square one. And I think a lot of times the community over in Australia, because there's such a sense of competition, we don't quite understand big picture that if we don't start working together, there is no future for us. We'll be waiting for the roles. We'll be waiting for that
Yeah.
writing job or that directing job or that, acting job. And I think also, like even for us, we don't even have a Vietnamese film festival. We did, but it's not as sustainable because it's always either one off or like it's run by one collective, which I find sometimes can be quite, there's no long term because unless we have the big backup of the mainstream, we are still doing piecemeal work just to be seen and heard. And a lot of creatives like myself, we face burnout. I've met a couple of people who said to me, Maria, my whole career has just been playing prostitutes and migrant workers, and I studied from the top schools. And, some people
Yeah.
have done even more training than I have. I am probably, in some respect, my trajectory has been quite unconventional because I'm able to jump. So, for example, after an acting job, I'll be like, okay, I need to pivot. I need to get into commercial directing. I need to pivot. I need to look into writing. I need to pivot. I need to look into marketing. Whatever skills that my core skills are valuable, I need to know that I need to be able to do that. Otherwise, I cannot sustain for another 10, 20, 30 years. Yeah. So it's quite difficult. But big picture is always a thing that I think in Australia, but I think globally. Now my sense is more like, how do we find not only ways to connect the diasporas from Australia to Canada to America and all these other countries, but how do we find ways to connect back to motherland, back to Vietnam? And how do we find ways for those two worlds to kind of start talking to each other to then breed a new wave of storytelling that is not like sort of like needing mainstream's approval or needing the big budgets to be made, because a lot of my stuff is micro budget. I just did a feature film only on $8,000, an action film, right? A lot of work, but I had to do it. A lot of people go, why are you doing it? Why are you doing it for so little money? I'm like, if I don't do it, who's going to do it? Want to sit around, look around, who's going to give us the funding to do it? No, I need a hustle to make money, save money to make a film and keep doing it again and again until finally we get some recognition. And of course, being Vietnamese, a lot of mate you back is always like, oh, how are you going to be a millionaire like that? You know what I mean? And I said to them, well, mate you back, like there's a lot more millionaires than a crazy, like creative like me. So hopefully I can get some funding from them. So, yeah.
Mm. Would you say to maybe some of the rising actresses out there in Australia that have you had any conversations with them in terms of them reaching out as a potential mentor? I mean, asking you to be their mentor, or say, hey, you know what? Thank you for representing us. Like, is it is that something that happens out there, or not so much?
It's a funny thing, okay? Because in Australia, it's like if you're doing something good, people tend to be like, oh, yeah. Like they kind of like act like as if it's not cool. It's very opposite in Australia, right? So for me, like I can't rely on external validation to do my work. So I'm kind of always, but in my senses, I always know that I'm doing something right because I keep on getting opportunities.
Hmm.
But when people do reach out to me, I think that there is a sense of seeing the fact that I'm quite genuine, that they want to connect on that level. So people say, oh, Maria, congratulations, you really love what you do. What I tend to do is I tend to go, I really want to know them. When people reach out, I don't want to know about myself. I
Hmm.
mean, I already know myself. I know what I'm good and bad at, whatever, what people perceive me, what I'm trying to put out there. But when people reach out to me, I always go back and go, I want to know what they want to do. And if they go, oh, yeah, I always want to do acting. In my head, I'm like, well, here's some little cool little steps that you can try. And maybe in 6 months' time, give me a message. Let me know how you go. So, because a lot of people, I don't want to go, hey, go to film school, go to acting school. It's going to cost you, $60,000 to do. No, that's ridiculous. So I'm not going to send them down that route because I didn't do that way.
Yeah.
So I would, and people be like, oh, should I do acting school and stuff like? You can if you have the finance, if you're like, if you got all that. But to be honest, you don't need that to be able to be similar to me at all. And people just get spun out. They go, but why are we going to acting and film school? I'm like, you do that as a framework. But for example, if you have nothing, you can use your creativity and figure it out.
Hmm.
In fact, you probably figure it out faster because you don't have enough resources to burn and waste time. So each time when you make something, you make choices. Spiritually, I feel like you're very quick at making the choices and making the right choice because you don't have time to kind of go, let me try option A, option B, option C. If my option D in my career doesn't work, I've got these options. If you cut those options down, you have no option except for that one thing that you laser focus down and try to get.
Right now in your career, if you were to rank being and what you're most proud of, would you say where would you put acting and where would you put being a filmmaker, and in what order?
This is very difficult because
Hmm.
I always wanted to act, but I have so much joy making films, indie films, because the community. Because when I make indie films, I know the people, I see everyone on set. There's a sense of respect, like family. But when I work on the mainstream, everyone treats each other like face value, and I see, oh my gosh, this is a huge budget production, but how come all these things are a mess? How come no one even got the language right? You know what I mean? And
The
all of that.
details, right?
Exactly. So when I make a film that is independent, I can feel the spirit of everyone coming together because they want to make something, they want to create something. And even when I finished making Echo 8 and we put it on the screen and people watching it, and I'm like, oh wow, we finally finished. And I can just feel all the people who were part of it. And not only that, they brought their friends, their family, they come and they're like, it's so amazing the first time they get to see this
Yeah.
on screen. All these Asians, not necessarily a migrant, kitchen sink story. It's an action. It's like Hong Kong action, but in Australia, and it's got comedy. And now that it's going through the different film festivals, even white people get confused. They're like, you're Vietnamese, you got an Australian accent, but you're doing action, but it's kind of cool and the actions are cool. We're so confused. And I'm like, it's not my fault that you're confused, but did you watch it all to the end? Yeah, we did. We really love it. And I love disrupting. As a creative, if we can disrupt people's perception and expectation on who you are,
Hmm.
that's going to pave the way for a future where we can be whatever we want to be. Of course, right now we still have to play the stereotype and do it very well. Once we do really good at that, then we can start to pivot and become creative and then create stuff that we want to see ourselves, our new identities.
So that's a good transition to. I know you also pivoted here to America. So you spend. So what does that mean? Do you call America home now, or is it just you live in both countries?
So funny, in like during COVID, like I got the diversity visa green card, right? So
Okay.
the lottery, like I thought that was like fake, like a scam, right? But I actually got it, I processed it.
Uh huh. Uh huh.
And me and my husband, we're like, there's one or two ways. Either we stay in Australia, we know how it all works. I'm so comfortable. I know how the system works here. Or we take a risk and do something new, and throw ourselves in the deep end. So we decided to move to the US, sold everything. We came
Wow.
only over here each with 2 suitcases. And most of it's film gear. I didn't have any clothes. Like I have one pair of clothes that I was wearing, and pretty much most as like, suitcase. We're staying at our cousin's place for a few months to figure out what do we do? How do we find a place? How do we get a bank account? And it was surreal. It was like a full on migration process, right? And then even then I still thought to myself, well, if I don't make it, then I'll probably have to find myself work at McDonald's or like in and out. But I thought to myself, okay, I put myself out there. If I don't get work, I need to go from scratch and see how we go. But what I love about America is even just reaching out to people, networking here and there, connecting to people. I got my first big contract job, which set up my company with VinFast. And I ended up going to LA, New York, back to Vietnam to film a lot of their promo video. And for them, it was quite unusual because it's female led. So I was able to figure out the video and then how it's edited, work with the team of men to get the shots. I'm shooting cars, right? And I'm like, I need to shoot cars to make them feel like they're not just cars. They're like animated. Like that's in my head because I'm looking around like, oh, all these other teams got bigger cameras than me. They're white. They're all like, and I've got all these little cameras coming in with a bunch of Asians, even though it's VinFast is Vietnamese, right? But, being able to go, okay, this is what I'm going to bring into it. I'm not going to go for what other people are doing it. I'm going to shoot it in a particular style that creates an emotion. And yes, and then after that job, I got the big role on Paramount and I was flown back to Australia for 10 months to
I
work on the
see.
show.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the VinFast opportunity came. Wow, that's a hell of a story. Just
Yeah.
first off, just to even you and your husband to make that decision together
Mm.
and to come out here and just to try to figure it out. That in itself deserves like just acknowledgement. So that's uh and in second to the VinFast opportunity is I have a little bit of a parallel story with them because I am one of the early supporters of VinFast USA, and I've done more or less on the not the filmmaking side, but on the event pop up side for
Mm.
them. But they have a lot of different agencies that they do work with. But the reason why my agency was very very special for them is because they want to connect with the Vietnamese Americans in Little Saigon.
Mm.
A lot of agencies were scared to take that on. I was one of the I was actually the only agency that was willing to take it on and to create a pop up for them. There's still a lot of geopolitical reasons why it's
Mm.
sensitive, and a lot of misunderstandings of who VinFast is as a company. So,
Mm.
um, I still continue to have a really great relationship with the company, and yeah, so just to hear hear your story with them,
Mm.
that was actually really really cool. So now coming back from the Paramount project, then you came back to LA after
Mm.
that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But with would is there a strong like press identity as well? Like where after you finish a project, you got to do all the marketing and promotion for a project like on that you did on Paramount. Like, what did you have to go back to Australia often to do kind of that kind of press run? Because I know in LA when you're on a promotional run, it interviews after interviews and stuff like that. Especially because you were one of the main leads.
I'll be honest with you. It's on that project. There has been some difficulty. Because I would probably say my character has an accent
I
on that
see.
project. And I think it's interesting because I actually haven't been interviewed like much for that project. So
Really?
yeah, yeah. And I don't know, it's maybe because of the whole accent thing, like because in the show I've got accent outside, it's like this, and people kind of go, oh, you just making it like there's a whole bunch of things. So it's I don't know. It's a project that I really is endearing to me because I got a chance to work with so many amazing creatives and really push myself to the next level when it comes to acting. But it wasn't something where I was running around and being a part of a huge press junket, unfortunately. So after that job, I then ended up doing my own theatre show back in Australia for a couple of more months, and then I got back here, and back here again, it was just Theoni's project I saw on
Hmm.
Facebook. And I remember reaching out for her about that. And for me, I'm like, okay, I'm starting anew in America, so I need to just do, as many like indie projects as possible, crew and cast and stories. on, because I always feel like there's more that could grow from that. And once I met Theoni, even at my first meeting with her, I said to her, look, now that you've got me on board, I need you to go off and figure out how to get
Mhm.
people like Gizwing or Hongdao. I remember telling her that. And she's like, oh, how do I do that? I'm like, first off, I worked with Hua, who is the main in The Sympathizer. He's the main character in The Sympathizer, right? But he played my cousin in the Paramount show. And Gizwing is on that show. So I had to kind of draw a map, like how we're 60
I
degrees of
see.
separation. And I went to Theoni. I'm like, Theoni, you go and pitch and telling all these people that you want on board that you've got someone who's the lead Vietnamese character on a Paramount Plus series that's across 10 episodes, and you pitch that and you get some names. And you know what I love about her? She got them. But I had to, because I'm like, if you want a good project, even though it is low budget, under resourced, but if you've got a couple of people who are willing to back up a really cool concept, which when I looked at the idea, I'm like, first off, supernatural Vietnamese outside of Vietnam, never been done. Oh my gosh, if this could be done well, if she gets the resources, if she gets the name actors, this could be a huge deal. So for me, I'm always thinking big. So I had to
Yeah.
kind of like segue her do that. But she did it. What I love about Theoni is like when you give her an idea, she runs for the hills. And by the time I got back from Australia back to America, she got everything all set up. And I was like, girl, man, big respect to you, because it's not easy. Because for her, she's female, young looking. A lot of times people think of her looking like a child or a student, but she was able to direct the whole thing, be able to command the ship. And I'm just watching her. I'm like, you are the next generation, girl. This is amazing. Yeah.
In hearing that, I have so much immense pride because what privately you and I were talking. I do have a relationship with Dione, and she was one of those young rising filmmakers that I felt just needed both a combination of the right opportunity, the right project, and the right people to believe in her. And when she came about this particular project, um, I knew nothing was gonna get in her way that uh, to really get it to execution, but to see the to where the scale of where it is now, or at least the for her to go and get like uh, a caliber talent like yourself, and also just the like how now I know the story of how she was brave enough to go get and present this to Kizuin. Um, is is I'm so proud to know that you were such a big influence and motivation for her to do so, because I do think that this after this project it's going to give her that confidence to
Mm,
continue to push forward, because those things that you articulated earlier, she does look very young, and it could be
mm,
very intimidating to take control of, or to be that dominant energy on set, right? um but I knew when I worked on a project with her, I just ultimately trusted her, and she was and she commanded her team really well, and she executed.
mm. One thing I do want to say that I do see across the board when it comes to Vietnamese people, and I'm now starting to see it more clearer, that we cannot wait for opportunities. No one will ever give us a break. That's the mentality I always have in my head, right?
Very well said, very well said.
Because
I
if,
echo
if
that.
we start to wait, it will never come. So therefore, we have to figure out how to sort of put it out there in conversations, plant the seed in many people's minds of a particular vision. And then, you know what? People are always going to back the best and most executable idea. And what I love about the Vietnamese Americans is there's so much giving, there's so much energy and vibrance, and there's such a faith that the industry, especially for us in the creative arts, is just it's going to get there. We're going to get there. And I feel like when I talk to people, because there's such a excitement about it, that people are willing to collaborate if we're able to present them the path, the vision. So I think as a creative artist, the more we're able to really see through an idea, even if it's just a project, but how does it fit in to the big picture to create that shift? that's important to communicate. And I think with Theoni, when she had that project, I looked at it, I can already see the vision. I'm like, wow, it's going to go to the festivals. You know, people from the outside, from
Hmm.
Vietnam looking, they go, oh, wow, this is a diasporic story, independently made,
Hmm.
female led. You know, oh, this is quite an unusual way of looking at things. And again, inside um, America, the Vietnamese will look at it and go, there's a sense of pride going, hey, we made this. We made it outside of Vietnam. You know, we can still do supernatural stuff. We can do stuff about our ancestors. We don't always need to feel like we can't tell that story, you know? So there's so much excitement that's built
Hmm.
on projects that's never been ever done before. Yeah.
Now to touch on that, I know you've been spending quite a bit of time here in LA and Orange County, and there was the Vid Film Festival kickoff party that happened recently with a room full of amazing entertainers and actors, people on the performing arts, and also entrepreneurs. What was your first? To take it a step back, what were your thoughts going into an event or party like that, and then what maybe share with us what or some of the what was your takeaway or from the conversations you had at that particular event?
I was really excited.
Mhm.
There's never something like that ever happen in Australia. So for me, it's like the first time seeing, wow, there are not only the numbers, but also the sense, the fact that we can create something that has such an elevated sense of bringing together creatives, not only creatives, but people from different industries
Mhm.
coming and attending and having an experience of this gathering that is quite high end, quite like, yeah, and I really enjoyed it. And the same sense that I can feel like there is more trajectory to seeing more things being made, seeing more Vietnamese on screen behind the cameras telling stories. Um, that will happen later on. But I do would love to see that, you know, we would like to see, I personally feel like if we can have more gathering grounds, creative dialogue, you know, similar to what we're doing, but imagine in a group of people being able
Mhm.
to explore stuff like panel type works, but not
Mhm.
just experts talking, but people can also have that exchange of dialogue to then share experiences. I think that would be something that would allow us to then like open ourselves up to our own personal stories and journeys, to then later on being able to craft stuff for screen. Because then you've got gatherings is one thing, and then you've got the making is another, but the in between,
Mhm.
the dialogue, right? The connection, all those types of projects, events um, will give us that that gap so that we can actually make things that are what we want on screen. Because
Mhm.
what I sometimes find with creators, we love the idea of seeing more Vietnamese on screen, but then sometimes we see projects that come out, we're like, oh, like what happened there, right? Like, oh yeah, I know you're trying to do family, you're trying to make people feel, but how come it came off strange? And my hypothesis is in between work hasn't been done. And
Yeah.
in between work really needs people like you and I who are really like wanting to hear and feel the story and feel how that creates that imagery, but also understand that we're not the experts. We're also
Right.
the participants
Mhm.
going into things. And I think because a lot of times we think as a director, oh, I know, this is what I want. This is what I want. That, to be honest, that's bullshit, right?
Mhm.
A director is a human. A human also eats and shits, right?
Mhm.
So if we come in as if we're coming in as a director, we also have to understand that things are bi-directional. And it's not only just the moment on screen, outside of that, even everything before that, prepping people up, but also allowing people to also be the artists and share what is important to them in that particular role or particular thing that they're doing. And as a director or a person who facilitator, we then shape it. And as we get good at shaping, it's like shaping a vase,
Mhm.
the outcome is going to be better. It won't crack at the end because we spent time in nurturing that process.
Very well said. I think I do agree in terms of there needs to be more mediums for conversations. I think there are a lot of amazing organizations now, and it does seem like it's stemming from America. There's one
Mm.
out in the East Coast in Washington D.C. There's a lot of the different groups here in Orange County, as well as in the a lot of Vietnamese professional groups are in the Bay Area,
Mm,
probably in relations to the investment circle and the financial world and all that. But um, I think that m- the media landscape, which is my motivation, the reason why I created my company, is because I do want to be able to do more intentional gatherings and have and through different formats. So I do feel the workshop format or the panel formats, and also these podcasts. There's a lot more. Uh, there's a lot more podcasters that are feeling they're coming into the market, but there also needs to be a level of there needs to be what's missing is the the support system and the ecosystem to kind of
mm,
help keep them doing it
mm,
as their main thing.
mm.
So with that, will I do want to transition to um, something that I am curious about is what is your relationship to the country of Vietnam? How many times have you gone back? What is it that you uh, w- what is your feelings towards the country of Vietnam?
Feelings towards of the country Vietnam. For me, because I've worked in Vietnam on like a Vietnamese blockbuster called Truy Sac with Jung Ngọc Anh, but
Okay,
not only that, I've been the vice president of the Vietnamese community in Australia, New South Wales. I was like one of the youngest, and one of the ones that be chửi quá trời, like always being told off because I couldn't speak Vietnamese or I don't understand, all that stuff, right? Everyone just throws it on me because I'm just happy and I'm able to transmute a lot of people's tensions,
that's
right?
awesome. Hmm.
So even going to Vietnam and working on an action film project, even the people in the country, got deported, like all that stuff, right? There's always a lot of dramas around the work that I do because I'm in between spaces.
Yeah,
So not only getting deported was one thing, coming back to Australia, people are like, why? Yeah, why? And I always have to say, as much as anything, I knew I had to work in these spaces.
yeah.
And once I did the film in Vietnam, I started to stumble upon and revisited the Hapajung story, the Trung sisters,
Mhm.
about the two warrior women and the band of women who, back in 4,000 years ago, were able to take back their place where they live. And once I got into that, I wrote a screenplay. I traveled to Guangzhou because there's a museum that looked into that. I did a lot of work on the Book of Hans, which is the only excerpt that we ever hear about Habajung. So we know Habajung is real.
Really? Okay.
Yes, the Book of Hans was a Chinese book, right? They only had one excerpt. They spoke about the barbaric women from the south, which is,
The Vietnamese
Habajung.
way. Mhm.
But that's so interesting because over the years, I realized in Vietnamese culture, we kind of see it as almost like a fairy tale or folklore, or women are seen as a beautiful object to be desired, and I feel like I really want to undo that because I feel like 4,000 years ago, women were quite matriarchal, were equal, but
Mhm.
sometimes even more powerful. We were warriors. We were in the military. We were running things 4,000 years ago. How crazy is that, right? So for me, I wrote a script on that. And even though it hasn't been made, but I feel like as a Vietnamese person, it's not just only the identity, but it's an ancestral, spiritual fighting spirit that we have innate. That even though when we have migrated to another country, whatever country outside of Vietnam, there is still that tension, that tension of who am I? Why do I feel like I don't belong? Why do I feel
Yeah.
like I have to fight externally or internally? Vietnamese culture, we have such an identity battle, right? But at the
Mhm.
same time, we have such a spirit, a fighting spirit. And that's something that I always, when I think about motherland, it's not only just a space, it is a spiritual essence of the fighter within, fighting to express oneself, to really connect authentically, to be at peace, not only environmentally, but with ourselves. And that's something we've been trying to do for thousands of years. So when I think about it on a very etheric level, it really helps me drive the work that I make. So therefore, even though I wrote the screenplay for that, it never didn't get made in Vietnam because of some issues. Even with that story represents something that people felt could be a threat. But it's interesting, the fact that story about strong women can be a threat. So for me, again, it got me to think more about systems and hierarchies,
Hmm.
and why there's always things that are trying to control us. And as a Vietnamese person, we need to be quite mindful of that. That we are operating in that space, whether we're inside Vietnam or outside. There is always some sort of external force telling us that, oh no, we're this, we're that, we're not this, we're that. And we if we give our control away creatively, or we wait, time's going to pass, and then another generation is inactive in creating that change. So for me, that's why I'm very particular with the martial arts action genre. And the work that I do is not only as an actor, but also director, producer. I edit a lot of my work. I choreograph a lot of my work, because the sense that I need to know that as one person, I can, hai bằng tay trắng, I can create. And not only that, when I can do that, other people, when they watch me, they're like, oh my God, she can do it. And then there's now this energy of people going, she can do it, I can do it. Or when people see me do it, other girls, other women go, oh, she can do it, I can do it. So then now we generate this amazing energy. And then after that, when I do other projects, I can then leverage that energy, because people go, oh, I want to work with Maria because when she works, it's so much fun, but we get the results. And I want to be known for that. So that's why I do things on a community level. There's still so much change that's needed. But even as I move to mainstream, I'm bringing the community with me. I never go into the mainstream by myself, because I have done it before. And I'm telling you, it's the most toxic environment. I forget who I am. I then question myself. I start to tell them stories that I don't even think that should be something that the Vietnamese community would be proud of. I then start isolating myself from my own ethnicity, just so that I can play with the big dogs.
Hmm.
Doesn't work. In the long run, it just really hurts your integrity. And at the end of it, the price you pay is too high. Just for a paycheck, and then you're living with that, nah, it's not worth it.
So to continue this, to touch on the story of the sisters, the Chung sisters, I understand there are some uh, reasons for it being very difficult to produce, probably in Vietnam. What are your thoughts on? Because I do find that story is, as an American born Vietnamese, I know very little of it. I hear about it very um on a macro level, or just, but like, I know the importance of it. Do you feel it could be made outside of Vietnam from a Vietnamese diaspora, or VQ, and
100%.
and
100%.
so and it could find the right financial, what yeah, and find the right financial group to support a project, because it has it. I understand the spirit of indie, but this does have. I feel like it does have to be, um not a studio system, but it's going to be a bigger endeavor, because it is a. I feel like it's a big, period historical, um action film. It definitely needs the resources. Um, you think fr- do you think that it could be made outside of the country?
Yeah, 100%. Like for me, I've already got the screenplay for the one done in the period, but like for me, being a creative, everything's adaptable. Like I even had a thought that, especially once I cut to America and I worked on Theoni's project and met a lot of people were like, Maria, we should do like a version of it that is like in the present time but cuts
Right.
back. I'm like, yeah, like the myth, Jackie Chan's The
That
Myth. That could be done, right?
I,
In the modern
that's where I
context.
was going with it creatively, right? It could be like, in respect, where it's because the challenge I feel, and I'm not a filmmaker myself, but it's when you're getting into historicals, or you're getting into period pieces, that's when you get powers to be that gets involved. And I see this happening to another, person who I respect, Veronica
Mhm.
Ngo, with this. because the premise of her studio was to share these different specific Vietnamese stories for um for people outside to appreciate, right? But every story that she has brought in her timeline that she's executed has been met with so much criticism. Um, and some of my takeaways from the lessons that I'm learning from why she's getting um, uh, targeted or she's not getting the support is these stories are so the stories she's trying to tell. Everyone has an opinion about how that story should be told, and um, so they criticize every nuances of it. So it's like it's and then it becomes a financial disaster, and and then it's hard to kind of build upon it. So she's always constantly having to both fight her fight as a filmmaker and a studio, owning a studio, but then
Mm.
also continue to leverage her Hollywood reputation. Like she still get like she's in a new film with it's coming out, it's a new sci-fi film that's coming out
Mm.
this month, and I feel like she's having the same energy like you, where she's fighting because she wants to see more women representation. She wants to see more stories, but she's very proud of her Vietnamese identity.
Mm.
So yeah, it's I for one think it's very important for these young women born outside of Vietnam to hear about this story that was uh, that 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 is probably unique to the country of Vietnam.
Mm. I think, to be honest with you, like there's if there's a will, there is a way all the time.
Mhm.
Um, yes, there's always challenges, but we need to start like focusing on first off what we have. And even for me, for me, I'm quite realistic because I make things happen. I don't just talk out of etherics.
Yeah.
For me, I'm like, once I finish my next two movies, which is still low budget. People are like, why don't you make a big budget? I'm like, I don't want to risk anyone financially either. Okay. So I'm pretty understanding. It's not like, oh, people give me money, I make a film. It doesn't work that way. I have to always figure out, okay, for these next two projects I'm doing, Echo Weight Trilogy, once that's done, I build enough leverage. By that time, I think people will be like, she's the go-to. She's no one in the whole world can do projects for that low. Feature film at $8,000 that look pretty semi-decent, pretty not bad with a family story, and shot in 14 days. She must be must be a robot or something like that. So if I can do two more of similar low budget, I reckon by that time, the next films after that, I think I might go on to do horrors, but then it will give me leverage to do the Trung sister stories in future. But at the same time, I'm also quite mindful of systems because I noticed that sometimes whenever like you get a little bit of heat, even when I done shows and get a bit of heat, people want to attach you to things, but you also understand that people come from their whatever experiences they have. I have lots of executives who'll be or producers talking, oh Maria, I've done films for $10 million. Yours only 8,000. And I was like, oh, can you please show me your film? They showed me their film. I'm like, I'll be honest with you, your film looks like a piece of shit. Like you spent $8,000. Why does it still look like video? Who edited it? Like, because I know technically how to do it. I don't contract people. I do contract people on bigger stuff, but I know exactly how things are put together. So no one can bullshit me. So when people come to me, go, I've got a more bigger project, I have to kind of assess, I'm like, what skills do you really have? Are you just someone who got money and just want to make films because it makes you feel good? Because we can make that happen, but you've got to understand you can't get in the way of creative work. You can't go, oh no, I want to cast myself in the main. Like, oh, have you done the acting? No, well, if you want to be the main, I need to get you trained up for that role, but you cannot pay your way through that. Because when we see projects, I see lots of projects fail because it's all about the money. And creatives crumble because there's a fear
Yeah.
that they're not going to get the money.
Right.
But if you're good creative, you're like, no, I'm here for the bigger vision to make this project reach out to the audience's heart. It's not for aesthetics. It's not to the style of, the style over substance. The substance is the heart. And the heart isn't something that's motivated by money. That's what I
100%.
realized in the work that I've done with community. Some people are the most happiest people and they don't even have a penny. How? How does that work? When some people have everything and they're so miserable, right? Same thing with the film industry. I figured it out. It's not just about the resource. But if someone who's got the heart and they're also open to the understanding the systems, and for me now I'm learning more about business and how business people talk, because business people, they talk in dollar signs. Like I had this
Hmm.
conversation with this woman. She was just
Hmm.
punching numbers, and I'm sitting there going, so interesting, so fascinating. She doesn't understand anything about creative because her language is numbers. And I have to learn her language, not have her understand my language,
You have to
because she
learn her
won't
language.
understand
Yeah.
ever. But for me, as a creative, I can at least learn something, understand what's going on. And I notice a lot of people who do have the resources, a lot of times their life is they are missing stuff from the heart, whether it's family. Like I've met with multi-millionaires who they're like, I just want my son to do this. I want my daughter to do that. And I'm like, and they've set up this whole multi-business thing that they're doing, but they're still quite miserable. And I'm sitting there having dinner with them, and I had to have a moment. I'm saying, are you okay? And they're like, what are you talking about? I've got this. I've got to. I'm like, I know you've got this. But if this was not here, what do you feel inside? I want you to have a moment to feel inside. And then they realize their focus, they've been too outer and they
Yeah.
forgot to work on the inner. So that's why a lot of, I know that what I do can look like it's challenging to a lot of creatives out there. But that's if the creatives haven't done enough inner groundwork. You have to do a lot of inner groundwork, because if you know yourself, my mom has a saying, "Big người biết ta trăm trận trăm thắng." Growing up, my mom always says that. She goes, if you know yourself, you know
Yeah.
people, then every single battle you're going to win. I grew up with that. She goes, you don't need to be the smartest person, the skilled. If you know yourself, that's a reflection of humans. Everything's negotiable in life. You'll never find a moment where you'll feel the challenge burn you. You'll feel challenges, but the challenges only allow you to understand this is what's happening on the outside. This is what people's fears are. So when you feel that people's fears, they get projected onto you, it's actually a good thing, because then you now have information that people have a fear in themselves. So then instead of
Yeah.
you trying to go, oh my God, they're now looking at me, you're like, okay, I reserve space to then connect with them and understand where that fear is coming from. Help them think about that. And then, so then the fear gets stopped, projected onto you, and then we can then focus on the task that we need to do.
Right.
Mm.
Couple things that stood out to me that in terms of your trajectory of your career, you've had so many of these moments where someone can say, "I've made it. I made it to like the mainstream and things like that," and then you turn around and you're you judge a project not based on like dollar signs, right? And you take on like I've struggled. I've seen this happen a lot with certain actors or producers. They're like once they've gotten to from the indie to and they moved up to like a major project, then it's like what's holding them back for the next project is I need to do something bigger and badder, right? Or I need to do something, and bigger and badder is measured by finances, is measured by all that. You've done there seems to me, at least from when we're talking, it's like you look at everything from a holistic picture, and it's like there's no comparison. Like you're like, yeah, the Paramount Plus project was cool, but then there's this little project over here in Little Saigon that just jumped on, and then there's the so I find that the secret to that, or at least from what I can take away from it, is you you're confident, you know yourself, right? And you really are coming from a place of passion and also impact, like. And I think those values that you put on helps kind of keep you uh, helps keeps you going, I guess. So it was just very, I guess my touch point on that is just it is very inspirational in that sense, because I've had in some advisor conversations, it's always like especially with young actors, is they and young actors and also young content creators. They've gotten this level of like um, value out of numbers that they've created, how many subscribers they have, or the big film they've done. And then it's like, but I mean, what's next after that? And I'm like, I don't know. We'll see.
Mm.
I need something bigger. So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's about bigger. I think
Hmm.
that's an illusion.
Yeah.
Fame is illusion, bigger is illusion, all of that. I always think my thing is that if, for example, one day, if the zombies take it over and there's an apocalypse, can you still be the person who you are, who you've been building the whole way? For example, if I was to not be an actor anymore, a filmmaker, does that take away who I am? No,
Mhm.
because regardless, filmmaking or acting or speaking, all those are modalities of expression. And that expression is to try to affect and create a better world for yourself. So if people focus on the material, they're going to lose sight. And I would say it's much more of a challenge to live with that focus. Because I've seen a lot of people who do I'm like, wow, that's a big figure. In my head, I'm like, that's a big figure. I've never seen that in my account. That's an interesting thing. But the price you pay for having that is also something you have to consider. And also at the same time, do we want to keep on living to appease other people,
Right.
to make people happy, or do we want to make something of ourselves that we create the change? And I think that's a powerful thing to at least take a risk in your life.
Yeah. And I know I want to close on this question, and this question is about, is this something that I feel very passionate about, and it's trying to close the gap between the Vietnamese diaspora and the Vietnamese community. What do you think we can do better to understand each other?
It's as simple as conversation. That's it. Lots of it.
Lots of it.
Lots of it. The fact that you have your podcast, Kenneth has his podcast, I think we need more.
More. Mhm.
Much more dialogue, because if you think about it, the process of dialogue isn't just sharing information. In between the spaces, new things emerge from that. When the two minds come together, more minds come together, we are able to share more and explore more. But if we're stuck within our own identities, then we can't create. We just stick by and we're always in defense mode, right? Trying to back up what we have. This is who we are. This is what we do. But then we don't have that space in between where we go, hey, what if we did something different? What if we crossed over and explore ourselves in a realm that we've never done before? And I think for Vietnamese people, we need more exploration within as well as inner and outer. And I think when we do that, there'll be less fear, for one thing.
Yeah.
Another thing is a lot of the internal tension dissipates. Because think about it, I always find tension is, if it's left inside the body, it becomes disease.
Right.
Dis-ease becomes disease, right? If it's tension for a long period of time, it becomes a physical thing. But if we're able to convert it, it becomes a creative outlet. It becomes like, when you're taking a shower and you get an
Yeah.
idea, that's like another
Convert it.
creative spurt. So we have to understand that creativity is a real thing that is inside of us, that is evolving around us, and it is creating, and it happens when we connect with people that allow that to come out as well. So, and that's, even though it's not a dollar sign, but if we keep using it time and time again, to be honest, dollar signs, money, finances, resources are still energy, right? That could also be acquired if we utilize our creative side of us to the point that we can then start to work in those fields and be able to get the resources to do what we do. And
Yeah.
that's what I'm trying to do with my next 2 feature films. People are like, I'm crazy. I've got a countdown for 462 days before I shoot 2 feature films back to back. I've only got 2 sponsors at the moment, and so I'm still like out there finding, like, putting out there and go, hey, does anyone want to come on board to make 2 action movies in Australia, Vietnamese, Japanese, Australian kind of thing. And I don't even know the outcome. People think I'm crazy. You need to be certain before you start. That's a very Asian mentality, right? But the issue is nothing ever gets done because everyone's still afraid. But if we can kind of go, you know what, let's take a risk. And if you've already got the track record to not having any of those big failures, then it serves you right to make that risk. It's not just, oh, I'm just making it up. I'm going to do it. I'm going to say I'm going to do this and then not do it. If you don't follow through, that's pretty bad. But if you're able to follow through throughout your career and still be able to create things, and that's my career. My career isn't just the big things. Lots of little tiny things, lots of successes along the way. And that's been the build up. And therefore I can then ask for something a little bit bigger and see within that duration of time who comes out of the woods to support that. And I think that's a fun process. It's exciting. It's sometimes nerve wracking, but I need to understand that to create something big in the world, or at least something big at that time, there needs to be some sort of trust within. And it's not about just getting confidence from the outside, but actually generating from the inside and putting yourself out there to getting rejected or to getting the resources for you to make what you want to make. Mm.
Thank you so much for your time. This has been actually a very fun, but then also needed conversation. I was definitely inspired, and I wish you all the best in your journey. I know our paths are definitely going to be crossing a lot more since you're here in the States. And as I have a building my journey, actually doing a lot more work in Australia and Vietnam.
Yes. Mm.
I definitely will be reaching out to you to get some more insight. So thank you again, Maria, for coming on and having this very insightful conversation with me.
Thank you, Johnny. Thank you so much for letting me be a part of VQ Media.